A sharp whistle blew, and the compartment doors snapped shut. The engine sighed steam, and the train lurched forward with a rattle. Vidi waved from the window until his father's figure shrank away, then turned back to his seat, feeling the weight in his chest. His friend account notification glowed. He opened it. Several new messages filled the top of the feed. Fiona, was the journey smooth? The train should have left by now, right? Fiona, Miss Ava seems a little upset. Maybe it's because you didn't bring her. Fiona, is it cold on the train? Vede smiled, drew his pen, and answered one by one. Vede, the trip's been fine. The train just left. Dad should be on his way home. If Miss Ava's sulking, try giving her some dried fish. She loves it. It's on the second shelf of the cupboard. Dried scarab beetles or locusts would work too, but don't let her overdo it. Stomachs are delicate. Also, there's probably a warming spell on the train, so it's not cold and the scarf's very warm. I'll take more photos. Hi, Vede. Michael nearly burst into the compartment, grinning. I knew you were on this train. Guys, over here. He waved the others over, dragged his trunk in, floated it up onto the luggage rack with a swish of his wand, and flopped into the seat opposite. Big news, isn't it, Vede? What news? Vede blinked. He'd lost the thread after 3 weeks away. The friend account, of course, Michael said, delighted. Oh, Vede's memory clicked into place. We all heard. People even came asking about it because they knew we were in the same year. Theo ducked in at that moment and finished, but most of them thought someone was lying. They were skeptical. Hi, Vede. Long time no see. Ryan slid in behind Theo. You probably don't check the SSC chat much, do you? Well, I still have to study, Vede said. I guessed as much, otherwise you'd be more talkative. Let Theo explain. He knows more, Ryan said. Theo Mancini, whose surname wasn't one of the legendary 28, but was still pure blood and very plugged in, leaned back. There were rumors even before the friend account came out, he said. They said a new, cheap, convenient way to communicate was about to appear, something that might break the loose old networks and make everyone more connected. At first, I thought they meant the friend account, Michael said. So when I showed my parents, they were stunned. I thought it was supposed to be secret among SSC members. Vede remembered hiding his own friend account at the bottom of his trunk and using study as an excuse to sneak messages. He'd begged his friends not to tell. Most of them, though, had at least handed a page of their account to their parents. Everyone tried to hush it up, but within days, the rumors had gone global. In those few days, our flu powder was used more than ever, Ryan said. Loads of people wanted in. My dad knows a pure-blood noble trying every trick to get the distribution rights for America. But Marchione, the owner of Aslan Magic Workshop, is cunning. Theo glanced at Vede. My grandfather says Marchione's like a hyena. If he's provoked, he'll rip his enemies' entrails out. Theo grimaced and stopped. He put it in a much cruder way, and I don't feel comfortable repeating it. No one dares to tangle with Marchione, Ryan agreed. They say he got the patent for the friend account from someone else, and that the inventor is a first year at Hogwarts. Theo looked pointedly at Vede. People were desperate to find you. I was terrified when I heard your name might be out there, Ryan admitted. Then something shifted the tide. The great alchemist Terence Mori publicly declared at a banquet that the inventor was his student and he would not tolerate anyone harassing or inconveniencing that student. Anyone who tried to track the student down outside him would be insulting and provoking Terence Mori. I only learned then how influential Professor Mori is, Ryan said, and Hogwarts has Dumbledore too. They paused as a witch pushing a snack cart rolled past the compartment door. Everyone bought something. The conversation picked up again as the soft clatter of chocolate frogs and crackers filled the air. Professor Dumbledore said everyone should respect his student too, Theo continued, unwrapping a chocolate frog. After that, things calmed down. I heard people who still wanted a piece of it went to Marchione instead, figured provoking him might be cheaper. Theo's frog sprang free. He lunged. His hands missed. The frog hopped toward the open window. Vede moved without thinking and snatched it back just before it could leap out. Theo exhaled. Thanks, Vede. Vede handed him the prone frog and asked, So, my name hasn't been leaked? Most people don't know, Ryan said. A lot of them still think the inventor is a 6th or 7th year. But you can't hide from certain pure-blood circles. Even with Professors Mori and Dumbledore speaking up, Veed, you shouldn't be alone at school. Michael hooked an arm around Vadi's shoulders and grinned. Don't worry, we'll stick to you like conjoined twins. By the way, rumor says Marchione spent a fortune buying the usage rights. Are you already rich enough to fund a country? Vide tried to sound casual. It's not that much, only 50,000 galleons. Michael made a face like he'd bitten something sour. 50,000! I've never even seen that many galleons. Theo laughed. Some idiots even said 1,000,000. Ridiculous. Ryan squeezed Vadi's shoulder. Theo cut off mid-sentence. A polite knock sounded on the compartment door. 62. Pride and Prejudice. Thump, thump, thump. Someone knocked lightly on the carriage door. Theo, sitting nearest it, stood up to open it. Hello? Voices drifted in from the corridor. Mancini? Is anyone in this carriage? I heard Vita Gray is here. Looks like I've got the wrong one. Should be a bit further up. Their conversation stalled when one of them peered inside and caught sight of Veed. The student's careless expression shifted to a bright, almost eager smile. So he really is here. He squeezed past Theo, ushered the other two in, and greeted V as if they were old friends. Hi, Gray. How was your holiday? Theo was shoved to the corner and watched helplessly as 3 students, all taller than him, crowded into the already small space. Veed raised an eyebrow, about to reply, when another voice cut in. Long time no see, Pruitt. I heard you went to Iceland for Christmas? Michael said with a smile, stepping up. Pruitt, that was the boy who had just entered, turned toward Michael and returned the smile. Yes, it was beautiful, but since I've been back, I heard about your friend accounts. He glanced directly at Veed. They're incredible. I immediately bought the full hardcover set, all 12 months. Michael chimed in approvingly. As expected of the Pruitt family. Even Marchione had to yield. We could only get one ourselves because of the purchase limit. I'm afraid we'll have to wait 2 weeks to buy another. Don't worry, it won't be that long, Pruitt answered with an air of confidence. If money's involved, Marchione moves as fast as a grayling. Of course, the December limited edition sold only in the first run, and only to truly ancient, noble, pure-blood families. Not everyone gets one. He let the last words trail off with a pointed look in Theo's direction. The Mancini family wasn't poor, far from it, but Theo had been sorted into Hufflepuff, and in the eyes of many purebloods, that meant he belonged in the lower social ranks. A flush rose in Theo's cheeks. Ryan, sitting beside him, went pale. He looked ready to stand, but Theo grabbed his sleeve to keep him quiet. Michael, however, seemed oblivious to the tension and turned to the 2 students standing behind Pruitt. They had been studying Veedy with obvious interest, glancing now and then at Michael while ignoring the 2 Hufflepuffs completely. Their scarves showed broad bands of green and silver. Slytherin. Pruitt introduced them with a practiced smile. This is Gaston Yaxley. The blond boy with heavy brows offered a polite nod. And this is 1L Foley. The darker-skinned boy's smile was mild and composed. They're both 6th-year Slytherins. We heard the inventor of the friend account was aboard and wanted to meet him. Though Pruitt's grin never faltered, his eyes fixed on Michael with a clear message. Move aside. Michael stepped back, shooting Vede a conspiratorial wink as he retreated. Gaston Yaxley stepped forward and extended his hand. Hello, Mr. Gray. Veedy rose and shook it. His voice was neutral, but in a place like Hogwarts, competence often bought tolerance. The pale Slytherin smile widened. I didn't expect the inventor of the friend account to be so young. Ravenclaw hasn't had a student this impressive in years. Mr. Gray, you're gifted. Your future could rival Terence Mori's. You need a larger stage. He paused, letting the flattery hang in the air. The Yaxley family would be very willing to offer you assistance. Pruitt's smile flickered with barely concealed envy. Michael glanced at him, then toward Foley, whose expression betrayed nothing. Veedy inclined his head politely. Thank you. I'm honored, but I'm only an apprentice in alchemy. I'm a long way from Professor Mori's level. Of course, Yaxley said, the superiority in his voice subtle but unmistakable. Professor Mori's reputation is unquestioned, but I admire your potential. The alchemy behind the friend account is elementary. Many 6th and 7th years could manage that. It's the idea that's remarkable. How did you come up with it? Vade smiled. I can't claim it was all my own. Do you know about the Muggle internet? The change on the three faces was instantaneous, as if someone had spoken a vulgarity. Muggle? They echoed, their discomfort obvious. Vidi, unruffled, continued. Yes, the Internet's core protocol is TCP/IP. It transmits data by breaking it into packets. A client sends requests to a server. The server processes them and returns results. The sequence of instructions, the raw input data. He launched into a concise, surprisingly technical explanation. He spoke about how computers communicate, then moved on to cloud computing, microchips, wide-area networks, and data planes. He talked about e-commerce's future, the deep integration of artificial intelligence and big data, blockchain systems, and even digital currencies. His voice stayed steady the whole time. Silence filled the carriage. The students who had hurried over to meet Vadi now lingered in the aisle, frozen as if repelled by an invisible force. When Vadi finally paused, the three Slytherins, who had politely endured until then, stood at once and made for the door with faces drained of color, their retreat quick and almost panicked, as if they'd been caught in a cold downpour. Theo closed the door behind them. A few other students waiting in the corridor diverted their eyes when he looked out, clearly reluctant to be drawn into what they'd feared was some sort of mind-bending lecture. Theo muttered a lock charm, and the door clicked shut. Inside the carriage, the four of them, Vidi, Theo, Ryan, and Michael, broke into sudden laughter. Wonderful, truly wonderful. Michael couldn't help but give a thumbs up. I thought you'd just snap back at him. Vidi had no idea when he'd given off such a Gryffindor impression. You can see how vengeful Slytherins are by watching Malfoy and Potter, he said, shrugging. He cast a silencing charm over the compartment, poured himself a glass of water, and added, I don't want them harassing me every day while I'm at Hogwarts. Theo nodded. You're right. Yaxley's vindictive, and unlike Malfoy's petty barbs, he prefers nasty methods. Not even a professor has ever caught him in the act. Ryan, you need to keep your temper in check. Ryan pouted, neither agreeing nor arguing, and instead asked, Vide, that Muggle computer, can it really do all that? He replayed Veed's words in his mind and managed to pull out a thread he could barely understand. They can buy things from all over the world from their homes? Veed chuckled. Actually, online shopping started about 10 years ago there, and it'll only get more convenient, but I don't know the technical details myself. He wasn't a computer genius. In his previous life, he'd been an ordinary university student. Most of the C he'd learned was forgotten the moment exams were over. Reborn into this world, he'd thought about introducing WeChat, TikTok, online stores, smartphones, building all that earlier and getting rich before 30. Then his Hogwarts letter arrived. Faced with a choice between being the world's richest person and learning magic, Vede had hesitated for a heartbeat, 0.1 seconds, and chosen magic. Michael looked skeptical. But you were talking so confidently. I just repeated things I'd read in magazines. It sounds impressive, doesn't it? Vide leaned back against the compartment and smiled. They won't know how to talk to me. Prout and the others will think I know a lot, but they can't really communicate, so they'll have to keep their distance. Just listening will make them uncomfortable. Merlin, Theo exclaimed. I thought you were supposed to be a Muggle computing whiz. I've seen their televisions. The experts on them don't sound this incomprehensible. For a second, Theo actually wondered whether what he'd heard was English or some special Muggle speech for computers, something about computer languages, C, C++, Java, Python. He fell into thought. Muggles had built machines and then invented countless languages for them. Veed changed the subject. Who are they? Who were you nervous about? They're a nasty faction among the pure bloods, people who would side with you-know-who if he ever came back, Michael said. Yom Prout. You might not have noticed him before. He's a sixth-year Ravenclaw who loves hosting gatherings in the common room. He even got outstanding in defense against the dark arts on his owls by self-study, but he's good with minor dark arts. He's narrow-minded. Don't provoke him if you can help it. I used to think all Ravenclaws were just bookworms, Ryan said with a sigh. Did you see Pruitt? He looked like he was itching to be Yaxley's pawn. He isn't a true Pruitt, Theo said. I heard his great-great-grandmother married a half-blood, someone named Dion or Dick, and when the Pure Blood Directory came out, their branch changed their name to Prout to get accepted among the Sacred 28. Did the Pruitt family ever recognize them? Vede asked. No, they were never acknowledged. Two brothers from the Pruitt family were killed in the war against you-know-who and the Death Eaters. Yom Pruitt's father and uncle are now high-ranking ministry officials. They claim to be pure Pruitts, and no one contests them. Theo grinned at the group's gossiping faces. Actually, the closest blood relatives to Pruitt in the school are probably the Weasleys in Gryffindor. Weasley? Everyone reacted in surprise. Yes, Ron Weasley's mother's maiden name was Pruitt, Theo said. The two brothers who died were her older brothers. They all died? Ryan asked. Yes, that's terrible, though at least the war is over. Ryan was suddenly very grateful for Harry Potter. The boy hadn't needed to be brilliant or powerful to earn the gratitude of many. He'd simply survived and helped end the war. Ryan, like many others whose families had suffered, respected him for that. The Yaxleys and the Foleys? Vede asked. Theo's expression dimmed. Yaxley, his father, like Malfoy's, served you-know-who for a time. After you-know-who disappeared, they all said they'd been under Imperio and bought their way out of punishment. Unlike Malfoy, Yaxley's father still works at the ministry and is supposed to be cruel and cold. I don't doubt that Yaxley is practiced in dark arts. Michael frowned. Even if they were under Imperio, they must have done terrible things. And they're still ministry officials? Yes, Theo said bitterly. It's astonishing, isn't it? Michael fell silent. This smart boy felt the towering image of the ministry crumble a little. Theo continued. As for the Foleys, their family followed Grindelwald. After he was defeated by Dumbledore, the purists faded from the public eye and the Foleys kept a low profile. But the purists were once more terrifying than the Death Eaters, so be extra careful around them. The compartment grew quiet. Michael and Ryan, both half-bloods, had little familiarity with the tangled histories of wizarding families or the scars of past wars. What didn't make it into a history of magic still cast long shadows. For a generation raised in peace, war was a textbook story, an abstract, maddening exam question. They hadn't realized that the shadow of war stretched over some of their classmates. Thinking of Professor Quirrell and the way Voldemort had once possessed him, and of classmates who might someday be tempted toward dark paths, the boys felt a weighty sorrow. The rest of the trip passed calmly. A few students came by to gawk at the supposed inventor of those friend account things. Vede's offhand explanation of the internet had put an end to those conversations within minutes. By the time the train reached Hogsmeade Station, no one else bothered him. The students bundled into thick coats and stepped onto the platform. In the distance, Hogwarts stood bright and waiting. "Follow me, students!" A booming voice rang out. On the dark platform, Hagrid waited for them, looking almost savage in a thick fur coat and carrying a lantern, like a towering giant. For those who didn't know Hagrid's true nature, his appearance was genuinely intimidating. The previously noisy students fell silent and fell in behind him as he led them down the platform. In a wide-open yard, many pitch-black carriages were parked, dim yellow lamps hanging from their frames. A few rocked gently in the cold night air. Students climbed into them one by one. Vede and his companions were moving toward an empty carriage when they heard a call. "Hi, V! This carriage has room." They looked up to see Hermione, Padma, Parvati, and Neville already inside. Padma pointed to a nearby empty carriage piled with straw. One by one, Vede's group climbed in. Michael waved first. "Hello, everyone. Did you have a good holiday?" "It went well, except for a certain someone who never checked the group chat," Hermione said. "I thought it would be easier to coordinate on there, especially to practice Expelliarmus." "Oh, Hermione, we haven't even started term yet," Padma cut in, sounding exasperated. "Let's talk about it tomorrow. About studying. Tomorrow." Even as a Ravenclaw, Padma found Hermione's intensity for studying a little terrifying. "See you in the library tomorrow afternoon," Vede suggested. "I need to borrow some new books." Hermione sank back, disappointed. Parvati beside her quietly exhaled in relief. Being unable to follow the conversation when academic elites talk about coursework feels like being trapped under a glass dome, stifling and embarrassing. Neville suddenly clambered out of their carriage, clutching his toad, Leafu, and squeezed himself into Vede's. "Hey, Neville, there's already enough people here," Michael protested. "Please, over there is all girls." Neville begged in a small voice, looking like he'd endured some great ordeal, but he pushed Michael into a corner and refused to move. Michael, pressed up against the carriage wall, snapped. "What's wrong with being with girls? The prettiest girl at Hogwarts is sitting right next to you. And the twins." A ripple of laughter ran through the girl's carriage at Michael's shout. Neville lowered his head awkwardly and muttered, "They're always laughing. It's too embarrassing. I can't stay there alone." Michael swore under his breath. Taking advantage of the carriage not yet moving, he leaped off without hesitation and clambered into the girl's carriage, joining Padma in conversation. Neville breathed out in relief, clearly impressed. Veedy and the others chuckled. Neville sheepishly scratched his head. The carriage jolted and bumped over the rough road. It smelled musty, and a thick layer of straw covered the bench. "Why doesn't this carriage even have cushions?" Ryan asked. They'd taken these same carriages to Hogsmeade at Christmas, but back then they'd been with their own housemates and hadn't had a chance to sit together like this. Theo guessed, maybe it's tradition. Surely they aren't that short of money? Anyone who had seen Hogwarts's feasts wouldn't think the school couldn't afford a few cushions. The school provides room and board and doesn't charge tuition. What more do we need? Consider it a test, Vady said with a grin. He flicked his wand at the straw, and it instantly fluffed into a thick cushion. The others touched it enviously. "Transfiguration is so hard," someone sighed. Veed's charms grades were strong. Transfiguration depended more on personal belief and vivid imagery, and he couldn't just force that into his friends. "Do Muggle schools charge tuition?" Theo asked, curious. Veed thought of the primary school he'd attended. Public primary schools are basically free, aside from a small fee, but private schools can cost at least £10,000 a year. £10,000? Theo's eyes widened. How much is that? Roughly 2,000 galleons, Veed replied. Theo gasped. So expensive. Muggles must be really rich. Even a pureblood family like his couldn't afford 2,000 galleons a year for school. Maybe only families like the Malfoys could. Most Muggle children go to public schools anyway, Veed said. Speaking of these carriages, they drive themselves. Are they some sort of magical artifact? Ryan asked. Neville suddenly looked up, about to say something, then clamped his mouth shut. No, there seemed to be invisible horses pulling them. Michael poked his head out. Listen. They all held their breath. From the sky came hissed breaths, snorts, and the sound of enormous wings cutting the air. Invisible horses. Ryan frowned, trying to place the description. I think I read about them somewhere. They're thestrals, Veed supplied. Right, Ryan clapped excitedly. Thestrals. Only people who've seen death can see them. That's why we didn't notice them before. So they're not invisible. People just can't see them? Theo asked, puzzling out the logic. Exactly. Vade nodded and looked ahead. One of the skeletal black creatures lifted its head. Its eyes were pale and pupilless. Its face was gaunt and fierce like a dragon's. It pulled the carriage docilely, its huge bat-like wings folded against its sides. Perhaps Ryan's voice had been a little loud. The thestral raised its head uneasily and quickened its pace. The carriage wheels creaked as they rolled to a stop at the base of the castle steps. Veed jumped down. The night air bit cold, his breath fogged white. He turned and found himself staring into the thestral's empty, pale eyes. The sensation was strange. No wonder old folks said that seeing thestrals was like seeing death itself, an omen of misfortune. What are you waiting for, Veed? Ryan slapped his back. It's freezing! The students trudged up the snowy stone steps, eager to get inside the castle. Around the corner of the hall, Filch glowered furiously at them for tracking mud through the corridors. The great hall blazed with light, and the house elves had laid out a sumptuous dinner. At the staff table, Dumbledore smiled at the new arrivals. It was still pitch black in the dormitory in the small hours when Vady, half asleep, suddenly felt someone watching him. In the single room, an unfamiliar gaze was unnervingly obvious. He blinked awake and in the dark saw a row of shiny eyes like little lanterns hovering in the air. His heart lurched. He sat up with a start, instinctively seizing his wand and aiming it. Who's there? Mr. Gray is awake, a high, eager voice chirped. Zoe knew Mr. Saf Gray would return to the castle today, and Zoe has been waiting. A slender finger flicked in the air, and the oil lamp by his bed sprang to life. 3 house elves stood in the center of the room, grinning as if it were the most natural thing in the world to appear unannounced at midnight. Veed felt his heart pounding against his ribs. He took a steadying breath. His fingers thawed a little, though his scalp still prickled. "Zoe, Harby, Phil," he said, trying to keep his voice calm. "Long time no see. What are you doing here in the middle of the night?" The elves bowed low, their large ears twitching, and chattered happily in turns. "It's like this. At Christmas, Phil wanted to give Mr. Gray a present, but Mr. Gray would have noticed if Harby hadn't given one. It's not that Harby had nothing. Zoe prepared something better. Phil tried and tried to think what Mr. Gray truly wanted. While cleaning Ravenclaw Tower, Harby heard the first years talking, and then Harby knew. They beamed at him together, their faces alight. Veed Gray will definitely want a broom." "I do want one," Veedy admitted, sitting up and looking at them. "But first years aren't allowed to bring brooms into school. If Veedy Gray performs well in flying, he can borrow a senior's broom," Zoe said, spreading her arms. "You will not be breaking the rule, because the broom is already in the school. Veed Gray will only be using it." Veedy thought of the after-class borrowing some students did, waiting near the pitch to take a turn on an older broom. "You didn't steal a student's broom, did you?" he asked, bewildered. "Not steal," Harby said, ears wiggling. "Not one, several. Brooms without owners. Come with Zoe, Veed Gray." The elf tugged at his sleeve. "Zoe wants to take Mr. Gray to his gift." "Right, wait, let me put on some clothes." He threw off the covers and swung his legs over the bed. Could you give me a moment?" They waited cheerfully. Outside, a January wind howled and frost rimed the windowsill. Veda followed the three along deserted corridors, his own footsteps echoing. Dawn was only just breaking. Even Filch wouldn't be prowling yet. The castle felt empty enough to be a painting come to life. Veda, wrapped in a cloak, glanced at the elves who wore only thin tea towels and couldn't help asking, "Aren't you cold like that?" Phil shook his head. "Not cold. Phil can adapt. Summer, winter, very cold, very hot. Phil is fine." Veedy looked at them more closely and felt a mixture of wonder and unease. They were peculiar and strangely powerful, wandless magic, the ability to apparate where wizards could not, a kind of strength that might have made them dangerous if not for the enchanted obedience that bound them to masters. Goblins had revolted many times in history. House elves, even when mistreated, rarely resisted. That was why most wizards who could have a house elf were delighted to own one, and why so many of those wizards treated them poorly. The Hogwarts house elves were, by comparison, treated well. The students did not take pleasure in cruelty. Veed's hands flexed at the thought as they walked on. They climbed and descended staircases until they arrived near Gryffindor Tower. On one side, a plain white wall. On the other, a huge tapestry of a bearded wizard in a pointed hat teaching trolls to do ballet. The trolls craned their heads to follow them as they passed. Veedy halted, anticipation fluttering in his chest. "What is this place?" he asked softly. "The come-and-go room, Mr. Gray," Zoe said. "We call it the Room of Requirement. It only appears when someone truly needs it. You must walk past this stretch of wall 3 times, thinking of what you need," Harby explained. She shuffled up to the wall and muttered, "Harby needs a place to hide things, a place to hide things, a place to hide things." She walked back and forth, and on the third pass a smooth door formed in the wall, complete with a warm brass handle. Phil grabbed the handle on tiptoe and pulled. The door opened to reveal a cavernous chamber, like a city walled with oddments. Towering piles of discarded objects formed streets and alleys. Broken furniture, rusted weapons, statues maimed by the dark arts, a tangle of muggle cannons, thousands of books, disallowed toys, and glass vials of mysterious potions. The air smelled of dust and old magic. The 3 elves beamed with pride and led him deeper. There, cleaned and polished, tied with an old red ribbon, was a broom. "This is a Christmas gift for Mr. Gray," they announced. "It's the best one here." "It's a bit old," Phil said softly, "but it can fly as well as any new broom." Veedy took the broom in both hands. A surprised, grateful smile spread across his face. The room seemed to brighten with it. The elves' silly, contented smiles matched his, and for a moment everything felt exactly as it should. Even though Vade had enough galleons in his Gringotts vault to buy 10 of the latest brooms, he still beamed at the house elves' gifts and shared the muggle sweets he'd brought from home. He'd grabbed a bag and shoved it into his pocket when he changed. These are made by muggles. There's no magic in them, but they smell lovely and taste even better, he explained. The house elves looked overwhelmed and hesitated for a moment. They'd exchanged gifts with Veed before, though, so they calmed quickly and accepted the candy, thanking him profusely. Does Veedy Grey want breakfast? Phil asked respectfully. Most of the breakfast should be ready in the kitchen by now. Yes, Vide answered decisively. Phil fetched a cleaner cushion from the pile, while Zoe and Harby left the room of requirement. They returned together a moment later, one carrying a large tray piled with food, the other holding a jug of Veed's favorite orange juice. Harby and the others knelt, spread out a tablecloth, and set the breakfast. Veed sat down and noticed the house elves remaining standing beside him, still holding their candy, smiling as they watched. A sudden thought crossed his mind. Why are you standing? Sit down, all of you. This is our breakfast party, he said, surprised. Sit down? Zoe repeated, stumbling over the words. Me, us? Of course. Veed laughed and mimicked her, then softened his voice. Is there anyone else here? The three house elves glanced at each other, their faces lighting up brighter than when they'd received the candy, as if being invited to sit was the greatest honor. For a long beat, they seemed rooted to the spot, huge, anxious eyes searching his. Vade leaned forward and tried again, gentler this time. Please sit. Don't you want to have breakfast with me? Of course, we do, they chorused. Zoe drew a sharp breath and then carefully sat down beside Veed. Harby, a little braver, plunked down opposite him with clumsy movements. Phil swayed, and only after a nudge from his friends tucked himself into the corner, his thin fingers clutching the tablecloth. Well then, Veed announced, looking at all three, let the breakfast party begin. He was the first to pick up a meat pie and handed one to each of them before beginning to eat. A moment later, soft sobs broke the morning air. Great wet tears streamed from the house elves' large round eyes. Strange, so strange, Harby sniffed, wiping his face. Harby is very happy. Why am I crying? Veda said nothing, just stroked the ugly little head fondly. Phil and Zoe swallowed their pies in big bites between sniffles, the taste of bread and sadness mixed together. In the shadowed nook among old furniture, a wizard and three house elves, where light and dark met, finished breakfast together for the first time. Ravenclaw's Monday still began with the notorious potions class. The room of requirement sat on the 8th floor, while the potions dungeons were far below. Veed was too lazy to take the stairs, so he flew on his broom, circled the castle twice, and landed in the central courtyard. The cold bit his fingers, his ears and nose were bright red. Winter was clearly no time for flying. No matter how many warming charms, the wind was unforgiving. Thump! Harby appeared out of nowhere, handed Veed his school bag, then eagerly took the broom from him. He gazed at Veed with reverent eyes. Harby will help Veed Grey put the broom in his dormitory, he announced. Thank you, Harby, Veed said, smiling. Harby bowed so low his long nose nearly touched the ground, then scurried off with the broom. Veed had already eaten and intended to go straight to potions, but the thought of the damp, chilly dungeons turned his stomach. The roaring fires of the great hall suddenly sounded very appealing. He climbed the steps, walked through the hall, and sat for a while. A few harried fifth-years were already at the long tables, hair a mess, faces drawn, balancing breakfasts and textbooks. Some looked as if they might fall apart at any moment. Veedy didn't want to disturb them. He read a chapter of potions quietly and left once his body had warmed. Yo, Vede, long time no see, a familiar voice called as he passed through the hall. Vede looked up. Griffiths? He said in surprise. Yes, it's me. The red-haired wizard's portrait was sprawled across a tall frame, the original portrait subject shoved into a corner, frowning but not daring to complain. Griffith's voice was as lively as ever. Haven't seen you all holiday? Missed me? Looks like you had a good break. Your face is a little rounder. Me? Different story. He rolled up his sleeve and jabbed at a bruised patch. See? Somebody even beat me up. It's only been a few years and people are so short-tempered now. Veed thought, are you sure you aren't the one making everyone short-tempered? He glanced at the put-upon portrait occupant and asked, weren't you in the corridor? How did you get into the hall? No, my painting's still in the corridor. Griffiths waggled a finger and laughed. They said there was no space in the hall today, but they didn't forbid me visiting. I'm visiting an old friend. I'm sure Dumbledore won't mind. Hey, little fellow! An elderly man in a top hat in a nearby portrait suddenly bellowed at Veed. You're the one who brought this fellow out of the astronomy tower, aren't you? Send him back quickly. Yes, yes! Other portraits that had seemed asleep started calling out. Send him back! Send him back! We only just chased him to the astronomy tower. Why did you let him out again? Do you have any idea how annoying he is? I'm losing handfuls of hair. You're a painting. You don't lose hair. This is a figure of speech. Figure of speech. Don't pick at my words. I'm just stating the facts. Why are you so angry? Can't we talk like civilized portraits? Someone drag this one away. The usually quiet paintings erupted into argument, and the students eating breakfast stopped to stare. Veed slipped out of the hall while the commotion grew. Griffiths, paying the uproar little mind, climbed over frames and even roused some truly asleep portraits, and followed Vid out. Noisy lot, aren't they? He said with a grin. House elves are much quieter than them. Vid stopped and turned to look at Griffiths. 67. Busy day. Their eyes met. A moment later, Vade stepped forward again. Did you see that just now? Griffiths nodded. When I was visiting, I happened to catch sight of you, and that house elf. A good house elf is one a wizard never notices, and Hogwarts house elves have always been the best. Many students don't even see a single elf before they graduate. He grinned. Naive little idiots. They still think the castle has some housekeeping magic that does their laundry and polishes their shoes. Whether or not one is seen isn't the measure of good or bad. Vada defended his small friend. Harby's excellent, too. You're right. Griffiths nodded as if in agreement. The fact that he didn't contradict a word sounded odd. There were no portraits in the corridor ahead, so Griffiths had to stop and watch the little Ravenclaw wizard walk away. A Ravenclaw who's friends with a house elf? He muttered, then laughed to himself. Are they really just friends? Veed soon noticed that the professor's attitudes toward him had softened. Even Professor Snape, surprisingly, awarded him 2 bonus points, an unexpected change, since before, even when Veed's potion work was nearly flawless, Snape would give 1 extra point at most 3 times out of 10. Veed wished he could have photographed the astonished faces of the Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff students in class that day. Professor McGonagall, usually strict, asked Veed to stay after class and handed him a reading list. Transfiguration is the most miraculous of the magical arts, she said with a smile. If you study these books carefully and truly understand them, you will go far in transfiguration. Thank you, Professor. Veed glanced at the list. He hadn't studied most of those titles yet, but the last few books are in the restricted section of the library. McGonagall went on. When you've finished the others, come to me. She looked at him expectantly, and I will sign your permission slip. Professor Flitwick was no exception. He promised Veed he could borrow any book from his private collection, and whenever Veed went to ask questions, the sweets on Flitwick's desk seemed even more plentiful than usual. Professor Sprout's smile grew warmer as well. After class, she lent him several herbology books. As a result, Vade's schedule tightened. In the morning, he would sweep down on his broom from the tower to the 8th floor of the main tower, where one of the 3 Zoes would rush to help return the broom to the dormitory. He would conjure exercise equipment or a swimming pool in the room of requirement to work out, then transform it into a study to read and preview his lessons, and only after that, eat breakfast. A house elf was always nearby. If anyone passed the door, they would warn him so he wouldn't bump into anyone entering or leaving the room of requirement. If he had classes, he went to them. When he didn't, Vade spent almost all his time in the room of requirement. The room could provide books and targets for spell practice. For potions, there were cauldrons, scales, fuel, measuring cups of every size, though he still had to bring the ingredients himself. For studying alchemy and the gifts and trials Professor Mori set him, the alchemical equipment was even more complete than what Professor Mori had at his own place. After dinner, until curfew, was SSC time. They met in the umbrella house to practice spells, finish homework left undone during the day, discuss and solve problems together, or simply sit and chat. With Vade's current advanced progress, No one in SSC could offer him much academically. The group had become an after-school tutoring session run by Vede himself. But not everything needed to be calculated in terms of utility. Time with his companions was precious. There he could relax his mind and spirit, set aside lingering worries, and through casual conversation and laughter, ease the fatigue of a full day of intense study. Watching once clumsy Neville and the others make real progress under his guidance brought Vede a satisfaction that at times surpassed the pleasure of learning a new spell. He'd grown used to the latter, while the former was always a joyful surprise. Good moods were contagious. At the end of every Umbrella House meeting, everyone wore smiles. "If only we could convince the principal to extend curfew by an hour," Padma said cheerfully as she packed up her books. "I've never enjoyed learning this much before." Neville nodded. When he was in the Umbrella House, even potions didn't hurt as much. He still made frequent mistakes, but his friends corrected him kindly, and no one scolded him. "Next week is Gryffindor versus Hufflepuff Quidditch, isn't it?" Michael asked, eyeing the students from those houses. "Yes." Hermione's face tightened. "I heard Professor Snape is the referee." "Then you're in trouble," Padma said sympathetically. "Professor Snape won't be fair. Everyone knows how much he dislikes Gryffindor, especially since Harry Potter's on your team." Snape's hostility toward Harry Potter was common knowledge around the school. Those who had been to the principal's office last time shared meaningful looks. The next day at noon, Hermione sent a signal in the Great Hall, and they all gathered in the Umbrella House to talk. "Maybe Professor Snape was sent by the principal to protect Harry on the pitch," Ryan suggested. "Snape has a bad temper, but Dumbledore trusts him. He must be trustworthy." Michael toyed with his Quidditch player model, poking the figures down and watching them get back up. "Of course, deducting points and protecting him could happen at the same time," he said with a smile. "They don't have to be mutually exclusive." Ryan sighed. "With so many professors around, why would the principal pick the one who hates Harry the most?" 68. Orphans. "Isn't that more beneficial for you?" Michael asked indifferently. "That may be true, but I think Cedric and the others would definitely prefer a fair game," Ryan said seriously. As expected of a Hufflepuff," Michael mused. "Don't think I don't know you're actually trying to say I'm stupid," Ryan snapped irritably. "Ha, how could that be?" Michael chuckled dryly. If it were Ravenclaw, he knew his house wouldn't pass up such an opportunity. "Actually, Veed, I wanted to ask," Hermione said haltingly, her voice threaded with a hint of pleading. "Can Harry also join the SSC?" The air dropped away. Ryan tensed. Michael's smile vanished. He looked first at the brown-haired girl and then at Veed. Veed's expression, however, stayed calm. He agreed quite readily. "Of course, Harry Potter isn't difficult to get along with. The problem is you, Hermione." "Me?" Hermione looked startled. "Have you forgotten Ron Weasley crying about him? Potter and Weasley are inseparable. If he joins, he shouldn't keep it from Weasley. Are you ready to forgive him?" Vede asked gently. His objection seemed to be less about Harry and more about Hermione's feelings. "Oh, that!" Hermione breathed a relieved laugh. "That's long past. He even tried to warn his friend later, didn't he? Although it didn't help much. After spending time together recently, I find Weasley isn't so annoying anymore. You can't hold a grudge forever over one quarrel, can you?" "Turning enemies into friends is a good thing," Ryan said, trying to lighten the tension. "And Ron Weasley's brothers are all excellent. He must have something outstanding about him too, right?" Hermione didn't quite agree, but as her mood relaxed, she felt the need to explain. "I hadn't planned to rope them in. Ron noticed Neville had improved so much and asked several times, and Neville kept quiet. But you all know, if the Death Eaters and you-know-who come back, Harry will be the first they look for. And he's really not very outstanding in his schoolwork. His grades are mediocre, he hasn't mastered the spells taught in class, and he spends a lot of time at Quidditch practice." In Hermione's eyes at first, Harry had been someone with a big reputation and little effort. Later, she judged him a likable rogue with good character, but still not diligent enough. Then she learned that he had lost his parents to the war and was still threatened by you-know-who and his followers. Once she realized that, Harry became, in her mind, a poor, vulnerable child. What did it matter if his grades were a bit low or he was a bit playful? Thinking of him growing up and what his parents had lost made her anxious. Hermione, always prone to worry, imagined you-know-who lurking nearby, Quirrell scheming, Dumbledore keeping his own mysterious plans, while Harry spent his days eating and playing, his homework slapped together or copied. She nearly wanted to pry open his skull and cram her worries inside. Harry Potter's future would bring huge dangers he couldn't handle by copying homework. Hermione had tried to teach the spells she'd learned at Umbrella House, but when Vadi taught the same lessons, everything was clear and simple. When she taught Harry and Ron, it was as if they'd been hit on the head by a troll. They couldn't grasp it. She didn't understand why and found it infuriating. Sometimes she doubted their intelligence, but seeing Neville's progress made her admit that perhaps her teaching method needed work. To get Harry up to speed as quickly as possible, joining the SSC seemed the only option. The only better option would be if Dumbledore personally tutored him, impossible, of course. So though it felt presumptuous and might annoy others, she asked. Fortunately, Veed agreed. Hermione knew that with Veed's approval, no one else would object. Later, when only the two of them were left, Michael couldn't help asking, "Why did you agree?" "Harry Potter's case," Veed said, smiling knowingly. "Of course," Michael replied seriously. "Veed, you know how much trouble Potter brings with him. I thought you'd avoid that kind of trouble." "I don't like trouble," Veed leaned back. "But if it's Harry Potter, an exception can be made." Michael frowned. After all this time, surely even Neville has figured it out. He's just an ordinary boy who, for some unknown reason, survived the killing curse. For some unknown reason, you-know-who disappeared that night and the whole world put the title Savior on his head, as if you-know-who had been defeated by a baby. "I used to think he must have been born with powerful magic, but," Michael trailed off. "But after starting at school, you saw that his intelligence and abilities don't match the reputation of savior of the world?" Veed finished the thought that Michael couldn't. "Exactly," Michael said, relieved that someone would say it. "You wouldn't have any special expectations of Potter because of that." Veed looked out the window for a long moment, then turned back to his friend. "You mustn't forget that Potter's parents died fighting you-know-who. They fought bravely to the end. That night, Harry Potter not only became the savior, he also lost his closest family." "Yes, that's right." Michael's face went red with shame as he stammered. "So no matter what he did or didn't do back then, it's beside the point," Veed sighed. "Harry Potter is the orphan of a martyr." "The orphan of a martyr," Michael repeated, chewing on the phrase, finally understanding why his parents would hush him when he gossiped about Harry. "Yes," Veed said softly. "Everyone who escaped the shadow of that war, everyone who enjoys the peace we have now, has an obligation to look after him, especially children like him." 69. Gray Eyes. Michael had already left. Veed turned and stared at the window pane. The reflection staring back at him had gray eyes, not as deep as black, not as bright as blue, more like the calm surface of a lake in late autumn, drained of any strong feeling. Sometimes people who met that gaze felt an unusual chill and wondered whether his heart was equally indifferent. Outside, through the glass, a group of students crossed the grounds, brooms in hand, trudging back toward the castle through the gloomy rain. Their faces and robes were splattered with mud, as if they had rolled through a quagmire, their features blurred, but the smallest figure among them still stood out. A man in a turban scurried across the scene, pulling his robes close against the cold. Then another figure swept through like a black bat, robes flying at his sides as if the rain recoiled from him. His expression was darker than the overcast sky, and every student he passed made frantic room for him. Veed chuckled softly. Harry Potter, Lord Voldemort, Severus Snape, the boy who lived, the Dark Lord, and the former Death Eater, people whose identities conflicted and clashed, lived and taught in the same castle, coexisting uneasily until fate finally resolved their contradictions. Thinking of Michael's expression when he left, as if his soul had been cleansed, Veed felt the corners of his mouth lift. He straightened the clutter on his desk, organized his recent assignments and notes, slung his bag over his shoulder, and headed for the astronomy tower. Of course, Harry Potter should be included, Veed told himself. He ought to help Harry get stronger. If Lord Voldemort ever returned, or gained power through some butterfly effect, who else would stop him? Veed was still too weak. Michael spent most of his time with girls. Dumbledore, in the original plot, had been cursed and fallen from a high tower. Despite his flaws, recklessness, impulsiveness, a lack of discipline, and only a handful of spells to his name, Harry was the weapon against Voldemort. From the start of school onward, Voldemort had effectively been beaten by Harry at least once every year. In the final year, Harry, as if aided by fate, found all the Horcruxes in record time and finally laid the Dark Lord to rest with hardly a scratch. Whether it was the halo of a protagonist or the workings of destiny, Harry was a trump card Veed could not ignore. Outside the castle, the rain kept falling. Lightning streaked across the sky, casting mottled shadows that appeared and disappeared through the windows. "Dreadful weather, isn't it?" Professor Mori said as he poured a cup of hot tea, paused, then added a little milk and sugar before settling into his chair with a satisfied sigh. "Yes," Veed replied, cradling his own cup. "But it makes me want to sleep." Muggles call that steady sound white noise. They think it masks other frequencies and helps you sleep better. Having grown more familiar with Professor Mori, Veed no longer hesitated to discuss Muggle theories and technologies with him. "White noise," Professor Mori mused, then chuckled. "They do come up with some strange studies. I once read a report, something about the length of a person's ring finger and intelligence. They also researched some fascinating things," Vedi said with a touch of longing. "The relationship between dreams and reality, time travel, extraterrestrial life. They're even exploring beyond Earth. If interstellar travel becomes possible, I'd like to be one of the passengers." "I would too, but at my age, I probably won't see it," Professor Mori replied with a wry smile. "Unless you live very long, or like Nicholas Flamel, you find a philosopher's stone." Veed smiled. "I read the stone can make the elixir of life. Is Nicholas Flamel still young now?" In the movie, Veed remembered, Flamel had looked like a fragile, pale ghost, bones brittle to the touch. He wondered if things were different here. Professor Mori considered for a moment. "The elixir can indeed prolong life, but 6 centuries take their toll. It cannot utterly halt decay." "Then immortality like that doesn't sound worth much," Vede said, tilting his head. Professor Mori laughed. "Only someone young and vigorous would say that so easily. When you're my age, you'll understand. As life nears its end, the fear of death and the attachment to living make you dread the end and crave more time." "You think that too?" Vede asked quietly. "I am mortal, so of course I do." Professor Mori stroked his teacup. "But Albus once said, 'Death is a great adventure. No one knows what lies beyond. It could be terrifying, or beautiful, or simply oblivion.'" He paused, as if remembering something, then murmured, "So I both fear death and look forward to it. I will keep walking to see what the scenery ahead truly is." Veed watched him in silence. Professor Mori broke the reverie with a chuckle. "These are topics for later. By the way, did you decide about the question I asked you earlier?" "Yes." Veed took a small box from his pocket and set it on the table, his tone one of reluctant reverence. "But Professor, this is invaluable." "The value of a gift isn't in its cost, but in how you use it," Professor Mori said kindly. "Tell me your thoughts." Veed opened the box. "It's a piece of alchemy skin. Stephen introduced me to the creature. Its body can expand and contract at will, as large as a dragon or small enough to fit in a teapot. It usually feeds on insects and mice." Professor Mori nodded. Anything else?" Veed drew a breath. "It's the best material for the undetectable extension charm. 70 boxes and crowns." "Tell me your understanding of the undetectable extension charm," Professor Mori continued, smiling. "Yes," Veed said solemnly. "The undetectable extension charm is a spatial spell. I suspect it can both extend and fold space simultaneously. It can be applied to any material, metal, earth, fabric, wood, so long as it's an enclosed, confined space. Theoretically, the charm can expand a finite space toward the infinite, but in practice it's influenced by many factors, most directly the material, the caster's magic, and how well they understand the spell." Professor Mori inclined his head slightly. Most of what Vede had said could be found in books, but integrating the ideas took effort. He had even included Muggle theories and his own insights. Enough material for a very good paper, if written out. It was clear Vede had prepared. Mori admired the student's meticulousness. In short, the undetectable extension charm is extraordinarily difficult to use and dangerously prone to abuse. For that reason, the Ministry of Magic strictly regulates it. Vad paused, glanced up at Mori, and continued under his teacher's amused gaze. Ministries of magic everywhere forbid private use of the undetectable extension charm. It may only be used to produce specific items approved by the relevant departments, and individual witches or wizards may not possess items enchanted with the charm without ministry approval. Mori chuckled. Yes, we're essentially discussing how to break ministry law. But Vidi, an alchemist without a case enchanted with an undetectable extension charm, is hardly a true alchemist. Of course, to avoid trouble with the ministry, you should also know methods of concealment. He raised a hand and summoned a book from the shelf, handing it to Vede. This contains a clever little trick, how to make a case look ordinary most of the time and transform when you need it. It's very difficult, my child, both to make an enchanted extension case and to conceal it. I look forward to seeing your work. And yes, ask me anything. Vede thumbed through the book, replaced it carefully, and took out a sheet of parchment. Actually, I have quite a few questions. The parchment listed 20 or 30 questions, none of which could be answered in a sentence. Oh, very studious, Mori grumbled, then put on his glasses and began to answer them one by one. Vede immediately took out paper and pen and took notes. By the time the Q&A ended, they had long passed the scheduled tutoring hour. As Vede was leaving, he hesitated. Professor, there's one more small matter. What is it? Mori asked, already a little tired but patient. I made a box these past few days, Vede said. Could you see if there are any flaws? From his backpack, Vede produced a long rectangular oak box, plain-looking, with no obvious runes. Mori murmured a detection spell and inspected it carefully. Does it mask the aura of magical items? No, better said, it isolates. There's an anti-theft enchantment, an Alahomora-proof ward, a curse-breaking layer, anti-jinx protections. He looked up at Vede in surprise. Are you collecting some powerful dark arts objects? Vede gave a sheepish smile. I wanted to borrow books from the restricted section, but I heard some of them carry dangerous enchantments that can affect you just by proximity. Mori laughed outright. Oh, V, my child, you're a touch overcautious. He laughed until his eyes watered, then wiped them and added kindly, Don't worry, Madam Pince makes arrangements when restricted books are lent out so they won't harm students. Vade's face flushed. So, is this box unnecessary? Not at all. Caution is never wasted, Mori reassured him. Your box is very well made. It can isolate most dark arts items, preventing any adverse effects on the outside world. At the very least, you can store dangerous books in it at night. Vade still looked unconvinced. What about those dark arts items that can't be completely contained? That depends on size, Mori said with a smile. If an artifact cannot be fully enclosed by your box, magical power will, of course, leak. But if your box can seal it completely from top to bottom, you needn't worry about any dark arts influence. In the dead of night, a figure moved back and forth on the 8th floor of the castle. I need somewhere to hide things, somewhere to hide things, somewhere to hide things. The familiar door appeared. Vade opened it without hesitation and stepped inside, his wand casting light over the interior. The room of requirement had become a small city of stacked furniture, shadows warped into strange shapes. Vade searched down the central corridor until he found what he'd come for beside a cabinet with a bubbling surface. There, on a pile of junk, lay an ancient, rusty diadem. It looked no different from the rest of the trash, ragged, dull gems like unpolished stones. Above it, the name Tom Riddle was stamped. Without that label, Vede would never have identified it among the refuse. He had a hazy memory of the diadem once being housed in a luxurious box, not in this dusty state. Memories from over a decade ago were unreliable, but his eyes did not deceive him. Vade set his oak box on the floor, picked up an old fire poker from nearby, extended his arm, and keeping a careful distance, grasped the diadem with the poker and dropped it into the oak box. He closed the lid and sealed it with multiple spells. Only then did his tension ease. With the diadem isolated, he could study the room of requirement without fear of being influenced by the Horcrux. He also worried that his frequent comings and goings might attract others, someone like Ginny Weasley, who could be possessed by a Horcrux and unleash disaster. Now the Horcrux was contained and future trouble removed. Vidi felt a rush of relief and excitement. There were so many mysteries in this room of requirement to explore. As he turned to leave, his hand went to his backpack out of habit. A voice, calm and disapproving, spoke from the shadows. "It's best not to take things out of the room of requirement, my child." Vede raised an eyebrow and turned to look. The tapestry showed silly Barnabas, the same one he always saw whenever he entered or left the room of requirement. Sometimes Barnabas was forcing trolls to wear tutus and dance. Sometimes the trolls were belting him on the head with huge wooden clubs. The two were forever tangled together in the woven scene, never speaking, never leaving. Vede had once thought tapestries were different from paintings. Whatever the reason, this one always greeted him. In the tapestry, the trolls were now sprawled asleep while the wizard sat cross-legged on the floor, eyes fixed on him with an unusually grave expression. "Silly, Mr. Barnabas?" Vede called. "Call me Silly Barnabas. Everyone else does," Barnabas said without much interest. Then, more sharply, "I suppose you took something from the room of requirement?" "Yes," Vede admitted, "but it wasn't anything that belonged to the room, Desh. Someone put it there, like the broom I took before." "It doesn't matter who left it," Barnabas said slowly. "In this castle, abandoned things eventually find their way into this room. When people truly forget their possessions, those things become part of the room of requirement. You may take what you need, like that broom, but you mustn't take things you don't need, and you mustn't use the room to satisfy personal desires." "Personal desires?" Vede asked, "like taking the items to resell and make a profit." Barnabas paused, then added, "If you really need money, there are always galleons hidden among the piles. You can find enough for daily expenses without abusing the place." "And what if I do take things I don't need?" Vade pressed. "Then one day those things will return to Hogwarts in a way you will never want to see," Barnabas said, his voice heavy with warning. "And you will be punished by a magical contract for violating the spirit of the room." He sounded almost sorrowful, as if he'd already seen some terrible fate waiting for Vede. One of the trolls grunted in its sleep, scratched itself, and rolled over. Its foul foot happened to land in front of Barnabas. The wizard pinched his nose and scooted away a little, then composed himself and fixed Vede with another heavy look. Vede couldn't help smiling. "Suppose I found a dangerous dark arts object in the room and took it away to deal with it, because I feared it might harm other students. Would that be a breach of the contract?" "Oh." Barnabas's train of thought stumbled. He thought for a long moment, then stammered, That would be a good deed. The castle would be grateful. No, that wouldn't count as a breach of contract." "Thanks for the advice, Barnabas," Vede said. "After I deal with the dark arts on it, I'll return the item." He waved, then left. After walking for a while, he let out a soft sigh. When the house elf had first shown him the room, Vede had wondered whether the room of requirement might produce a room full of galleons or a cache of time-turners if someone really needed them. If he took all the books or alchemy tools that appeared inside, would the room be empty the next time, or would the items simply reappear? He had thought about testing it, but in the end he suppressed the temptation. He wasn't the first to find the room. Countless students and professors had discovered its properties long before him. Lord Voldemort had even hidden a Horcrux there. The house elves knew about the room. If it were truly possible to take whatever you liked, surely someone before him would have found that exploit. It wasn't that everyone had been as selfless as Harry Potter. Young Tom Riddle, for example, would have used any resource to its fullest. The only reasonable conclusion was that he couldn't hollow the room out. There was some limit, some invisible contract that governed it. Vede had suspected as much, and so had not risked testing the boundaries. Still, he couldn't deny the quick sting of disappointment. Who doesn't like something for nothing? He patted his face and reminded himself he'd already received plenty of help from the room. Greed had no bottom. He mustn't let it make him lose sight of what really mattered. The next morning, the sky finally cleared. After days of heavy snow and gray weather, everyone rejoiced. Students woke early and wandered the castle lawns in groups, chatting and playing. At breakfast, owls streamed into the great hall. dropping packages at students' feet. Despite advances in communication, owls remain the wizarding world's reliable couriers, still crisscrossing the skies with parcels. Ava landed beside Vad carrying a box of Fiona's freshly made candies and desserts. She gave Vad an indignant peck on the arm, as if blaming him for leaving her behind, so he tore off a bit of beef for her. Ava swallowed it, hooted twice in satisfaction, spread her wings, and flew off. Veed shared some of the sweets with the students around him, then turned to Michael. "Michael." "Hmm?" Michael answered, mouth full, then praised. "Mrs. Graves' peanut brittle is amazing." "I'll leave the rest at Umbrella House later. Help yourself," Vadi said. "Could you help me take a few photos later?" "Sure," Michael agreed immediately. "Did you get a camera?" "My father's Christmas present," Vadi said. "Take a few for me too. I haven't even thought about photography since I arrived." "Okay." As they were finishing breakfast, two more owls swooped toward Veed. One dropped a letter. The other dropped an unusually large package. Michael's eyebrows shot up. "Your family sent you all this?" "No." Vadi looked at the signature on the envelope. "These aren't from my parents." Chapter 72. Replies and Photos. A thin letter came from Gringotts. It listed his recent income and noted a withdrawal. Ferdinand Gray had taken a sum of galleons from the vault. Veed glanced at the numbers, then set the letter aside. Another package arrived from Marchioni, accompanied by a detailed letter about recent sales of the friend account, the income due to Veed, and plans for the next promotion. Although productivity lagged behind demand, Marchioni had already pushed the market into Asia and Africa. He enclosed sketches of several new friend account models and earnestly requested Vadi, as the product's inventor, to offer valuable suggestions so the new launch would be more successful. Reading Marchioni's earnest pleas, Vadi pictured the tycoon lying awake over this problem as though only Vadi could save him. He finally understood why Professor Mori had said, "Use that man's ability to help you make money. If he bothers you, just ignore him." Presumably Mori had received similar owls for years. Marchioni hadn't only sent money, the package also included alchemical supplies, most common, but with a few rare items, like African tree snake skin, hard to buy even for cash. Vadi wrote his reply carefully. He didn't waste space debating which sketch looked nicer. He offered concrete improvements he'd devised while studying alchemy. For example, limiting a friend account to only 2 or 3 linked people was inconvenient. He'd modified the runic circuit so that, with a simple spell, multiple blank friend accounts could be linked. He suggested adding a page of pictograms, emoticons, that would let users express emotions with simple symbols. Perhaps not essential, but popular with younger buyers, words that felt cold on paper could become funny and endearing when replaced by an emoji, which might spark another wave of demand. He proposed a special positioning feature as well, allowing the holder of someone else's friend account to check their location at any time. He added one paragraph of marketing advice. "I recommend placing the positioning feature prominently in the header and giving those accounts a distinct color and design from ordinary friend accounts. If a communication device can also track location, people will fear privacy invasion. The likely buyers will be parents and children or couples in serious relationships." He wondered briefly whether his invention might inadvertently break up a few relationships. He imagined how courtship might change. Instead of swearing love in words, lovers might exchange positioning friend accounts as proof of loyalty. Veed then thought of himself. He didn't mind his parents knowing where he was. If he fell in love someday, it would be with marriage in mind, and fidelity would be a baseline. He had no desire to marry young. Magic and alchemy were far too interesting. Dating would only waste precious time. Confident in his reasoning, he finished the letter, attached the modified friend account, and sent it off by owl. He spent the following days taking photographs all over the school: the Great Hall, the corridors, the Umbrella House, the library, the Black Lake, the Forbidden Forest, the Quidditch pitch, the Ravenclaw common room and dormitory. When he met classmates and professors, they posed together. Veed had never been a parent, but he had been a son for a long time. When he traveled, he used to photograph landscapes and buildings for his parents, only to discover they didn't care about scenery as much as they cared about him in it. So now, the setting hardly mattered. The focus was always the people. He stood beside the kind-faced professor in the greenhouse. By the black lake, he wrapped an arm around bright, laughing classmates. In the umbrella house, the SSC members sat together, chatting and joking. Fear often comes from the unknown, like walking through limitless darkness and hearing only your own heartbeat. A lamp to light the way, to show thorns and mud, makes the path feel less terrifying. The photos felt like a lamp. The film cameras used at Hogwarts were classical, and photographic development was normally tedious, but magic sped everything up. Vedi turned the room of requirement into a dark room, ran the negatives through developer, stop bath, wash, fixer, and print, and soon had a stack of moving photographs. He stood in a bright room and flipped through them. The camera didn't just record scenes, it seemed to capture the mood in each moment. People smiled brighter than usual. Professor Sprout would reach up to tuzzle ahead. Professor Flitwick might leap onto a stack of books and back down with the same excited energy. He regarded Professor Mori as a well of wisdom and a life mentor. In most photos, Mori looked gentle and composed, but in one frame he had just taken a sip of tea and his face contorted, eyes shut, eyebrows puckered, mouth twitching as if the drink were impossibly bitter. V laughed. The photo had to stay private. If Mori saw it, he would likely obliterate it to save face. He kept scrolling. His hand paused over a photo and his expression softened. It showed the three of them at home on the sofa at Christmas. His parents close together, hands clasped, glancing at each other with quiet affection. Sometimes they leaned over to kiss him lightly on the forehead. Vedi leaned against the window, tracing the picture with a fingertip. He smiled, and a warm light flickered in his eyes. After finishing his grueling training, Harry headed to the Great Hall for dinner and found Ron and Hermione already at the long table. Hermione was flipping through a book while Ron sat with a piece of bread, deep in thought. "You know what?" Ron said in a low voice as Harry joined them. "I've discovered a truth." "What is it?" Harry asked, filling his plate. Ron looked solemn. "If you don't eat lunch, dinner tastes even better." He bit into his bread with exaggerated relish. "I discovered a truth when I was 3, Harry said, mimicking him. "Please tell us, Mr. Potter." Ron waved a hand in mock seriousness. "If you're tired and hungry, any meal tastes delicious," Harry declared, taking a huge bite out of a sandwich. Hermione glanced up, underlined 2 lines in her book, and made a note. When Harry had almost finished, she frowned. "The match is almost here. Why is practice still so intense?" "Because the match is almost here," Ron said. Harry's stomach tightened. "And Professor Snape's the referee." "Listen, mate, I'm sure Snape still bears a grudge from last time we beat Slytherin," Ron suggested. "Why don't you just break your leg so you don't have to play?" Hermione snorted, clearly uninterested in indulging their paranoid fantasies. Harry grimaced. "I can't pull out of the match. Gryffindor doesn't have a substitute seeker. If I don't take part, we can't play." "If you're really worried that Snape or someone else might try to foul you, work on your magic instead of daydreaming," Hermione said, biting back the name she didn't want to utter. "Harry, we were supposed to go to Umbrella House yesterday afternoon. I already told everyone." "I'm sorry," Harry said, embarrassed. "But Wood announced an extra practice." "That's because it rained yesterday. Hufflepuff canceled their reservation, so Wood snapped up the pitch," Hermione complained, as if someone would steal it. "Don't say that," Harry said quickly. "Wood's thinking about the House Cup too. If we beat Hufflepuff, we'll move ahead of Slytherin in the Cup. It's the first time in 7 years. He found himself unusually deferential to Hermione of late. She'd been lending him notes, helping him check homework, guiding him through his history of magic essay, even teaching him practical spells he hadn't learned in class. Harry wasn't made of stone. He was sensitive and craved kindness. Hermione's steady, unselfish help made him want to be agreeable and quiet around her. "Hermione, is that scamper really that good? Why have we never heard of it?" Ron asked. "Don't say that," Hermione snapped. "It's SSC, Starry Sky Chasers. It's, dare I say, the best study club at Hogwarts, at least for first years." Ron made a face of pained admiration. "A study club? Of course Hermione would join something like that." Harry thought for a moment. Hogwarts was full of clubs, the Gobstones Club, the Magical Herbology Society. Older students often belonged to several. He and Ron had heard of many, but joined none. Ron, with 5 older brothers' worth of experience, had once warned Harry in private. New members sometimes got hazed. Older students would make them do difficult or embarrassing tasks as a test. Harry had politely declined invitations ever since. But Hermione's recommendation was different, a club that supposedly improved magic skills. With Professor Quirrell's classes so hit or miss, Harry was actually curious. He wanted to be able to rely on magic when it counted, and to be able to deal with certain people, like Malfoy. He also didn't want Ron to feel left out, so he'd been torn. After they ate, the plates and platters on the long table were cleared. They gathered their things and headed back toward the common room. Hermione kept reminding Harry, "Comb your hair, make a good impression." A burst of arrogant laughter cut through the corridor ahead, followed by raucous cheering. Harry's blood ran cold. "It's Malfoy. He must be bullying someone," he said. Before Hermione could finish, Harry had rushed toward the sound. Ron was right behind him. "Wait, Harry, calm down." Hermione stamped her foot and hurried after them. In the corridor, Neville was surrounded by a group of Slytherins. He gripped his wand and stammered, "Malfoy, what do you want?" Draco tapped his wand against his palm and smirked. "Longbottom, I've learned a new spell. I want to test it." Low, cruel laughter spread through the group. Neville pointed his wand with shaking fingers. Don't come any closer. I'll tell a professor. Leglocker curse!" Malfoy yelled and aimed. The spell hit Neville, and his legs were bound together as if fused. Neville collapsed, his face going red, scrambling like a fish out of water. One boy kicked his wand away, and the Slytherins laughed harder. Malfoy bowed as if taking applause, then taunted, "Tell a professor. Merlin, Longbottom, you're too timid. Are you even a real Gryffindor? Did the Sorting Hat get it wrong and put this great oaf here by mistake? Then where else would he go, Draco?" A high, sneering voice asked, "Pansy Parkinson," deliberately loud. Draco pretended to ponder. "Good question," he drawled, looking around. "How about the rubbish bin?" Neville began to sob. The Slytherins roared. "Let him go, Malfoy!" Harry shot into the corridor like a cannonball. Hearing Harry's voice, Malfoy spun around, but he was too slow. Harry barreled into him and sent him flying. Malfoy crashed into a grinning Goyle nearby, and the two of them tumbled to the floor together. "Harry Potter!" Malfoy shouted, furious. Ron charged over and planted himself at Harry's side, facing down the Slytherins. With the numbers against them, his mind raced. Perhaps they should retreat toward the library. "Harry, don't you! Oh, Neville!" Hermione's mouth went white with anger when she saw Neville. She rushed to him and began undoing whatever curses had been used. Neville finally rose with her help, trembling, his eyes fixed on the Slytherin stepping on his wand, Theodore Nott. Under Neville's fierce glare, Nott's foot shifted back a fraction. "This is too much!" Hermione snarled at everyone. "How could you do this to him?" "What's it to you?" Malfoy snapped, brushing dirt off his robes as he pushed himself up. "You filthy mudblood!" Harry barely understood what had happened before Ron and Neville lunged forward with a roar. "You'll pay for that, Malfoy," Ron yelled. "Don't say that word. Don't!" Neville, suddenly brave and furious, swung 2 fists at Malfoy's face. The delicate features of young Master Malfoy registered shock. He yelped as blood began to spurt from his nose. "How dare you!" Pansy Parkinson screeched, grabbing Ron's robe and raking her nails across his neck. The Slytherins didn't stand idly by. Goyle kicked Neville in the stomach while Nott shoved Ron away. Harry hesitated only a moment before throwing himself in when Crabbe aimed a blow at Neville. Instantly, the Slytherins and Gryffindors were grappling on the corridor floor. They had no time for intricate spells. It was fists and boots, pushing and shoving. After a short advantage, the 3 Gryffindor boys were pushed back. Hermione, though she didn't fully understand the curse Malfoy had used, grabbed the wand she knew best and didn't hesitate. "Wingardium Leviosa," she cried. Her wand flicked sharply. Every Slytherin in the immediate area felt as if their robes were choking them. Their clothing lifted them off their feet. For a couple of seconds, they hung awkwardly in the air before thumping back down to the stone with a collective thud. Harry and the others on the ground stared at her in surprise. Pansy clutched her nose and snarled, "You cursed mudblood." Malfoy, face streaked with blood, scrambled up and drew his wand. "Densaugo," he shouted. "Stop!" Harry snapped, drawing his wand and remembering a spell he'd read. "Tarantalegra." Their spells collided midair. Malfoy's curse struck Hermione. She whimpered and covered her mouth. Her front teeth began to elongate at an alarming rate, pushing past her lips and extending toward her chin within an instant. Harry's Tarantalegra hit Malfoy, but his inexperience made it only knock Malfoy backward instead of making him dance. Spells began ricocheting down the corridor. Students darted away to avoid being hit. Realizing their wands were doing little in the chaos, many young wizards and witches resorted to plain punching and kicking. Hermione's teeth had already grown down near her chin. She tried to back away, but Pansy blocked her path. Without hesitation, Hermione rammed into her and headbutted the girl. They both cried out in pain. Immobulus, a voice suddenly rang through the corridor, freezing everyone mid-movement. For a second, the sight of students suspended in bizarre poses looked almost ridiculous. A flash of hope ran through some minds. Professor, but only Neville cried out with relief. Vide. Harry was still holding Malfoy's face with one hand and grappling with Nott with the other, stuck in a contorted position. He turned his head and saw a slim figure outlined by the light from a window. Neville, the newcomer said, surprised. And Hermione, what are you doing? Before Neville could reply, the newcomer cast two quick spells. Finite Incantatem, Relatio. The frozen students loosened, their limbs felt weak, and their muscles slack from the enforced stillness. Harry let go of Malfoy and looked toward the arrivals. It wasn't just Vede Grey who had come. Michael Corner and Padma Patil from Ravenclaw, and Theo Mancini and Ryan Carlo from Hufflepuff were with him. The different houses shared some lessons, so these students knew each other enough to be polite acquaintances, though they weren't close friends. Still, Harry and Ron recognized them as model students, top of their year, always praised, never in trouble, especially Vede Grey, who seemed liked and seldom crossed by professors. That reputation put a subtle pressure on Harry and Ron, a reminder of how out of their depth they felt. Under the watchful eyes of Michael and the others, the Slytherins scrambled upright and hesitated. None of them resumed the attack. Vede ignored the lingering querulence and bent to help Hermione. He pulled her upright and, face to face with her, saw the absurd length of her front teeth. Hermione tried to hide them with her hands, though they were still growing and almost reached her shoulder. The long, pale teeth flashed strangely in the light, at once comical and horrifying. She whimpered, touching them in shock, tears pricking her eyes. "It's all right. Madame Pomfrey can fix this in 2 minutes," Vade said quietly, taking off his outer robe and draping it over Hermione's head. "Padma, could you take Hermione to the infirmary with me?" "Of course." Padma answered immediately, sliding an arm under Hermione's to support her. She pulled Vade's cloak down to conceal Hermione's teeth from prying or cruel looks. The three of them left, Padma steadying Hermione until they were out of sight. Vede turned back to the group and smiled politely, though his eyes were serious. "So, who can tell me exactly what happened here?" 75. Ask Confrontation. The air around them went taut. The Slytherins instinctively avoided Vade's gaze. Some of them took an unconscious step back. Only Malfoy tried to put on a brave face. "This is between Slytherins and Gryffindors. Stay out of it, Vede Grey." Draco. Nott tugged at his sleeve and hissed, "This is getting boring. Let's go." "It's because of me," Neville blurted, trembling slightly. He forced himself on. "I ran into them on the way. Malfoy used the leg locker curse on me. He said he wanted to practice it on someone. Harry and Ron and Hermione, they stood up to help me, and then Malfoy called Hermione a mudblood." "Neville," Michael snapped, and Neville's voice cut off. For a beat he looked lost, then, under the watching eyes, realized and glanced at Vede with a hint of apprehension. Everyone else realized it too. Vede had never said outright at school that his parents were squibs, only that they couldn't do magic. In the eyes of many wizards, squibs were almost the same as muggles, and often looked down on even more. When Vede first arrived, some had sneered at him for that background. He'd smashed that prejudice with his skills so completely, they eventually assumed he was pure blood with elite training. Now, remembering he came from a non-magical family, the room fell silent. The low murmurs stopped. You could hear people's breathing. Nott let go of Malfoy's arm. "So that's it. Aren't classmates supposed to practice spells?" Vede said, looking straight at Malfoy. "Coincidentally, I've learned a spell too. I'd like to ask Mr. Malfoy for a demonstration. If Veed had rushed forward screaming like Harry and the others had, Malfoy might have felt more confident, but Veed was only half smiling, as if not angry at all. That made Malfoy colder than any shout ever could. "What?" he stammered, clutching his wand. If he saw himself in a mirror, he might have resembled Neville when he'd been surrounded, timid, guilty. Veed raised his wand, bowed slightly, and fixed him with an icy stare. "Bow, Mr. Malfoy." "I refuse," Malfoy blurted, pointing his wand wildly. "I meant Granger. Calling her that wasn't about you." Longbottom said it first. "This person is both malicious and foolish," Veed murmured and flicked his wand. "Expelliarmus!" A red streak flashed. Malfoy was hit, thrown backward, and knocked into Crabbe. His wand flew from his hand and clattered at Nott's feet. Nott looked around, didn't pick it up, and edged back 2 steps. No one noticed him. All eyes were on the blonde boy curled on the floor. Pansy Parkinson tried to move, but Michael leveled his wand at her with a gentle smile. "I usually don't hit girls, Pansy. Don't make me break my rule," he said softly. Theo and Ryan stared at the other Slytherins, ready to act. No one actually helped Malfoy up. His usual cronies stood frozen, staring. Malfoy clutched his head, forced himself to his feet, and glared at Veed. "Don't think I'm afraid of you, Veedy Grey. Do you know who my father is?" Veedy nudged the boy's wand with his boot and said, "Continue." Malfoy snatched up his wand, his hand shaking. He was angry, resentful, and above all, afraid. The boy in front of him was not the bookish target he'd expected. Rumors said Vaden knew more spells than some 5th years. "Ah, I think I forgot to count to 3 just now," Veedy said mockingly. "After all, I'm also a mudblood, so perhaps I don't understand your pure blood etiquette." That word landed like a slap. The Slytherin faces around them showed varying degrees of discomfort. Malfoy ground his teeth, eyes flicking. 1, 2. He had only reached 2 when he thrust his wand forward. "Leg lock or curse." Veed had been ready. The spell glanced off and hit Nott, who'd been trying to look invisible nearby. Nott's legs snapped together, and he went down with a thud. 3. Veedy counted calmly and flicked his wand. "Tarantallegra." Malfoy's legs began to jerk wildly, as if dancing a furious jig. He tried to lunge at Veedy. His upper body and lower body twisted in opposite directions until his waist gave with a sickening snap and he collapsed. Even on the floor, his legs twitched uncontrollably, wrenching at his injured side. He howled in pain and looked absurd. A few Slytherins couldn't help a nervous laugh. Malfoy's face went from pale to red with humiliation. He glared, murderous, but everyone before him blurred into a wash of unfamiliar colors, faces suddenly strange and cold. Veed waited until Malfoy was near tears, then walked over and lifted the spell. He knelt beside the sweating, disheveled boy and asked sincerely, "Is bullying fun?" Malfoy stared back, panting, too afraid to answer. Veed straightened. The Slytherins stepped aside automatically as he left with the others. Nobody said a word, and nobody stopped them. 76. The bad guys complained first? "Harry, let's go too." Ron hauled Harry along the corridor, hurrying after Veed and the others. The 2 of them had been in the center of the scuffle, but thankfully were getting little attention now and were slipping away easily. As they rounded the corner, Harry glanced back and saw Pansy and Goyle moving to help Malfoy, only to be shoved away by him. The once proud blonde was a mess, furiously wiping a bloody nose, while the other Slytherins clustered around him, offering hypocritical smiles and hollow sympathy. Even from across the hall, Harry could read the falseness on their faces. He'd always thought Malfoy, apart from Snape, was the worst person he'd met, more of a pain than Dudley. But right then, he realized Malfoy wasn't as powerful as he'd imagined. He had no real friends in Slytherin. The wall cut off Harry's view. "What are you looking at?" Ron asked. "Nothing." Harry turned his head. "I was just thinking, if I were up against someone unbeatable, you and Hermione would stand by me and fight." "Of course," Ron assumed. Harry meant Malfoy and his gang bullying Neville and answered indignantly, "Slytherins are always so awful. We'll never give in. We can't let them get too cocky. Neville's just been too timid. He needs to be brave." "He is brave, remember? He and you punched Malfoy together, right on the nose." "Oh, right." Ron brightened at the memory. "Neville finally acted like a proper Gryffindor. Did you see Malfoy's face? I bet he was about to cry." Ron's glee made Harry a little uneasy. Malfoy probably deserved it, but the scene reminded him unpleasantly of Dudley and his gang chasing and beating him. They walked on and saw Veed and the others up ahead, grouped together. Something about them made it hard for others to approach. An odd, quiet authority seemed to surround those ordinary students. Harry's feet stopped. Ron, what? They're the SSC, that extracurricular study group Hermione wanted me to join, Harry said softly. Ron went suddenly awkward, the smile draining from his face. He stammered, Yes, I want to join. Harry made his decision. I want to learn real skills, practice real spells, not just sit through lessons with Professor Quirrell and read from textbooks. That's great. I mean, you should go. Maybe you'll be one of the top students someday, Ron said without meeting Harry's eyes, sounding unlike himself. Aren't you going, Ron? Harry asked, surprised. I wasn't invited. Hermione only recommended you, Ron forced a smile. You just go. I think I need the infirmary. Crabbe might have kicked my ribs in. Maybe Hermione forgot to invite you. Let's go ask together. Harry pulled Ron toward the group. Don't, Harry. Ron seemed reluctant, dragged along by Harry, but didn't stop him. He clung to a faint hope that Hermione simply hadn't thought to mention it. After all, he and Harry were inseparable. They'd just fought together with Neville. As they approached, they overheard Vede speaking to the others. Neville, you need to go to the infirmary and see Madame Pomfrey. Your arm might be fractured. Everyone be careful. Slytherin might retaliate. Don't go alone. Veed, what about you? Theo asked. Are you all right? I'm going to see Professor Flitwick about a punishment, using spells on a classmate in the corridor. I can't avoid detention for that, Vede replied. You're going to... Oh. Michael blinked, then nodded. That's the right thing. Why? Ron, who'd come closer, looked confused. If the professor didn't see it, it didn't happen. Why confess? Harry and Theo nodded, but Ryan looked thoughtful. You don't think Malfoy would take a big loss like that and not complain, do you? Michael pointed out. Confessing to Professor Flitwick is better than being punished by Snape later. That's true. If it were Snape, he might dock dozens of points and give a month's detention. Neville's voice trembled. Snape's harshness in potions left him still nervous. Then let's go together, Ryan said. We shouldn't let the professor think it was all your fault. You didn't do anything, Veed said quickly to Neville, stopping him. Neville, you were being bullied. It would be wrong for you to be punished. Go to the infirmary first and check on Hermione while you're there. With that, he waved and left. Harry opened his mouth. He'd meant to ask Ron about the SSC, but Veed was already walking away, and the chance was gone. All Harry could say was, Then let's go together. Only then did the pain register. It was everywhere. Aching limbs, bruises, and shocks he'd somehow ignored in the adrenaline. He was surprised he hadn't noticed it sooner. Veed knew Flitwick would be on the first floor of the castle at that hour. He made his way to the staff room and knocked. Come in, Professor McGonagall called, and the door opened. Inside, McGonagall, Snape, and Flitwick were gathered. Flitwick, grading papers, looked up and smiled. Veed, what's the matter? Do you have a question? Veed stepped in, a little embarrassed. I do have questions, but more importantly, Professor, I've come to accept punishment. I broke a school rule. Punishment. Flitwick's surprise was plain. The other two professors turned to look as well. None of them had often seen a student come forward to confess after getting into trouble unless there was some other motive. What happened, Veed? Flitwick asked kindly. Veed hesitated, glancing at Snape and McGonagall, not out of fear of Snape, but because his intention to prevent further trouble felt, suddenly, like tattling. He felt ridiculous, as if the phrase, the bad guys complain first, was floating above him. Professor McGonagall's expression grew serious. Mr. Gray, I believe the faculty should understand the circumstances surrounding any breach of school rules. All right, Veed took a breath. It's like this, Professor. 77, groups, individuals, Veed told the whole story plainly, neither exaggerating nor holding anything back. Professor McGonagall listened with flaring nostrils, furious. Bullying classmates and using such insulting names, we will not tolerate this. Severus, I'm giving Mr. Malfoy a month's detention, at the very least. Professor Snape looked pale and distant, as if lost in thought. Hearing McGonagall, he was momentarily stunned before saying slowly, Of course, you are right. Minerva, do as you see fit. Very good, McGonagall exhaled sharply. When she turned to Veed, her sternness softened a little. Mr. Gray. Yes, Professor. Veed bowed his head. I know I shouldn't have used spells on a classmate in the corridor. Ahem. Professor Flitwick cleared his throat twice. Yes, impulsive. What if someone had been hurt? For that recklessness, I will deduct, He stole a quick glance at his colleagues, then announced, 5 points. He said it with a hard little smile and a discreet wink at Veed, a silent signal. Don't worry, we'll put them back later. McGonagall's expression shifted into something almost approving. Of course. At the same time, for bravely defending your classmate and successfully casting Expelliarmus, I will award you 10 points, Mr. Gray. It's clear you have been very diligent in your spell work. In the Umbrella House common room, Michael Corner was surprised. 10 points added? He said. Veed shook his head. Actually, only 5 points net. Professor Flitwick deducted 5 first. I know, Michael insisted, but that's Professor McGonagall. She doesn't show favoritism to Gryffindor. Precisely because she's fair, Padma said calmly. She gave 10 to Ravenclaw. Think about what Malfoy did. A month's detention is almost lenient. And they didn't get any special treatment from Snape either, Theo added with a grin that carried news the others hadn't heard. Someone saw the Slytherins go complain to Snape. They were kicked out in under 2 minutes. Ryan nodded. Even if Snape's usually strict, he wouldn't favor Slytherin arbitrarily, would he? Neville frowned. He didn't agree. If they could see Snape's nitpicking in potions, especially toward Gryffindor and Hufflepuff alongside Slytherin, they might think differently. Their chatter was cut off when the door to the common room opened. Only one person could be coming at this hour. Padma waved and called, Hermione. Hermione Granger walked in with bright steps and a cheerful smile. Good afternoon, everyone. Padma blinked. Hermione, you look different today. No. Hermione tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, a little embarrassed. Maybe it's because I heard Malfoy got what he deserved. I'm just a bit happier, that's all. Padma looked unconvinced, but Michael noticed right away. Hermione's hair was the same messy brown, but her famously large front teeth were gone. Her smile was normal and neat, and she looked even younger and more radiant. Michael couldn't help himself. Wow, Hermione, you look great. Hermione smiled shyly, and to draw attention away from herself, turned to the corridor and called, Come in, Harry. Harry Potter, who had been lingering outside, finally stepped through the door. Everyone turned to look. He ran a hand through his hair and, oddly flustered, managed, hello, everyone? I'm Harry Potter. He immediately mortified himself. How absurd was that? They'd been at school together for months. Of course they knew who he was. Hermione had been telling him to make a good impression, and he'd made a mess of the first sentence. Before his embarrassment could fester, Veed stood up and offered his hand with a smile. Shall we reintroduce ourselves? Hello, Harry, I'm Veed Gray. If someone else was making a faux pas too, it somehow eased Harry's shame. He gratefully shook Vade's hand. Michael stepped forward next. Welcome. I'm Michael Corner. By the way, your move catching the snitch the other day was brilliant. Looking forward to the next match. Thanks, Harry smiled. Theo Mancini, Theo said with a friendly nod. If you're playing Hufflepuff next time, know that I'll be cheering for them. Hope you enjoy the game. Harry tried to think of something witty, but his mind kept drifting back to Wood's roaring, rain-soaked pep talk. Hufflepuff is nothing to worry about. Beat Hufflepuff, win the House Cup, make Professor McGonagall proud. He decided silence was safer. I will definitely give it my all, Harry blurted before he could stop himself. Theo grinned. That's the spirit. Ryan Carlo. Ryan shook Harry's hand with a straightforward smile. Although I don't belong to many clubs, SSC is definitely the best. Padma Patil. Padma gave his hand a quick, friendly squeeze. My only request, don't mistake me for my sister. I won't, Harry promised. The Patil twins did look alike, but their personalities were easy to tell apart. Finally, Hermione reached out. Your friend and partner in SSC, she said, smiling as she shook his hand. Oh, Hermione. Harry laughed, the last of his awkwardness dissolving. Surrounded by the friendly ritual of introductions, he felt genuinely accepted. It was a different kind of belonging than what he had with Ron, or the curious respect of classmates who knew him as the boy who lived. He couldn't quite name the difference, only that it felt soft and warm, like settling onto a cloud. After a brief welcoming, Harry, half nervous and half excited, asked, this is actually my first time joining a club. I don't really know how these things work. What are the SSC's rules? Do I have to do anything?" Everyone exchanged puzzled looks. "A club?" Theo said. "Are we a club now?" Neville sounded surprised. "Isn't SSC already a club? I thought it was." "Do student clubs have to be registered with a professor?" Ryan asked uncertainly. Michael chimed in, "Isn't it a society?" "Societies have membership fees, don't they?" "We haven't paid anything," Ryan said, drawing on what he'd picked up from his Muggle relatives. Neville was befuddled. What's the difference between a society and a club, anyway? For a moment, they were silent. No one could say what set the two apart beyond the name. Harry hadn't expected this. He replayed how things had led up to this and glanced at Hermione. Veed looked at Hermione, who was trying very hard not to laugh, and said helplessly, "Hermione, what did you tell Harry?" Hermione burst out laughing, waving him off. "I didn't say anything. You and Ron guessed it all yourselves, didn't you?" Harry stared. Hadn't she said nothing? She'd repeatedly insisted the matter was important, that they be careful and prepared, and reminded him to bring his wand. Then she'd watched them wildly speculate about the kinds of initiation trials they might face. Ron had even offered one especially ridiculous theory. Maybe they'll make you sneak into Snape's office and steal something of his, like his underwear or socks, or throw dung bombs in front of Professor McGonagall's door to prove you're brave. At the time, Ron looked as if a furious professor were about to tear him to pieces. Hermione had looked pained then. Harry had thought she was upset, but really she'd been holding back laughter. Or maybe she'd kept quiet because Ron and Harry had come up with such inflated guesses. Vedi couldn't help but chuckle. "We're really just an after-school study group. People come to practice charms, discuss homework, swap notes. We usually meet after dinner. You can come and go as you like, no formal leave needed, and there aren't any strict rules. The only rules are posted on the wall." Harry turned. A single sheet of paper was tacked to the wall with a few short rules. Members should help one another, be friendly and united, and not move other people's things without permission. Basic courtesy. The only unusual one forbade bringing anyone into Umbrella House unless all members agreed. Harry relaxed at first. These weren't real restrictions, and then felt his heart drop. He was new. Could he invite Ron? "Neville, your seat is here," Neville said enthusiastically, leading Harry to a space beside him. Next to Neville's desk, a table had been set aside for Harry, with its own little bookshelf and cupboard. Wooden panels made a semi-enclosed nook that gave privacy while still allowing easy conversation. Nearby were small tea tables, a food cupboard, and a worn but comfortable sofa strewn with cushions. Vedi, with help from Zoe and others, had salvaged and repaired furniture from the room of requirement until the place felt almost like a little town. The food cupboard was always stocked with cakes, biscuits, puddings, and sweets. A few dark silver pots held tea and water. House elves kept it supplied. When they had spare time, the house elves decorated Umbrella House too. Vedi and the others would often find a new trinket on the wall, a pot of wildflowers in the corner, or a useful piece of furniture added. What had once been an empty, abandoned classroom had become warm and lived in, full of small signs that people used and cared for it. Harry liked it at once. He was handed a contact parchment for SSC members. The idea of keeping in touch on a parchment was common now, though Harry hadn't had a chance to get one over the Christmas break. Hermione had given him a slip before, but because they spent so much time together, it hadn't been used. Ron had two, one from Hermione and one Mrs. Weasley had sent after the holidays. Every Weasley child had one. Ron chatted with his brothers on it before bed, and Mrs. Weasley would sternly tell them to go to sleep. Harry envied that. Now he had a second contact parchment. He tucked both into his textbook and looked around. Everyone else had already started work. Neville was carefully copying Transfiguration notes, and the whole room felt calmer and more studious than the noisy Gryffindor common room. If you wanted to work in peace in the common room, you never could. The library was quieter, but Madame Pince's rules against eating or talking made it awkward too. Harry took out his charms homework and began to write, but stopped after the title. He needed to borrow 2 reference books from the library, but with everyone studying, would it be rude to leave? Maybe Hermione had the books. Theo, sitting nearby, noticed Harry's indecision and asked with a knowing smile, "Trouble getting started?" Harry reflexively covered the messy doodles and half-completed notes in his book and mumbled, yeah. "We didn't know how either at first," Theo said. "Ask V. He'll show you how to structure essays and which reference books to read. Borrow those before you come tomorrow and follow Veed's method. You'll see the homework becomes a lot easier." Hermione read the most of them, but she wrote down everything she read. Every scrap of knowledge mattered to her. Vedi, though, was good at zeroing in on what they actually needed and selecting the best book to fix a particular problem. Read what he suggested, and the half-understood bits snapped into place. Theo hesitated, then pointed at Harry's notebook. "If you don't mind, can I take a look?" 79. Training plan. This, I wasn't paying much attention in class. Harry flushed and pushed the book away, embarrassed. Theo had already noticed. He flipped through Harry's textbook, sighed, and said, "Your notes are pretty sparse. You haven't grasped the main points. How about this?" He raised his voice. "Everyone." Heads turned toward them. "Harry needs to borrow everyone's notes," Theo announced, "if you're not using them right now." "Okay, I'm pretty confident about potions. Just promise to give them back before next Monday." Michael sent his potions notes over with a levitation charm. "I'm good at astronomy," Ryan said, sending not only his notes but also a book on star trajectories. Neville fumbled a little, then took out his notebook. "For herbology, Theo and I are actually pretty similar." "No, Neville, you're better," Theo said earnestly. "Professor Sprout speaks very highly of you." Neville colored and scratched the back of his head, smiling shyly. "I can lend you my history of magic and transfiguration notes anytime," Hermione offered. "Then I'll only be left with charms and defense against the dark arts." She directed several notebooks to float over. "And I suppose you'll need to learn how to write essays?" Harry nodded eagerly. "Yes, I'm not very good at essays." Later, Theo pulled Harry aside. "Keep Vade's notes safe, especially his defense against the dark arts notes. They're more thorough and easier to follow than what Professor Quirrell covers in class." "Thank you, Theo," Harry said gratefully. "You're welcome." Theo smiled gently. "We're companions now, aren't we?" About the essay on the softening charm, approach it from 5 angles, and you can use this structure for future essays too. Brief introduction, historical background, development and changes. Veed spoke as he drew a mind map on a scrap of paper, the title in the center and 5 main sections branching out, each with 2 or 3 subsections. No one had ever taught Harry how to structure an essay systematically. Most Hogwarts students developed their own methods over time. Clever ones refined approaches through repetition, while others copied or threw something together. At Harry's primary school, homework was often perfunctory. Essays were brief and free-form, nothing like the long, measured compositions Hogwarts required. Listening to Veed, Harry felt his confusion lift. Every time Veed listed a point, a corresponding idea clicked into place in Harry's mind. By the time Veed finished, Harry was almost impatient to get his thoughts down. The 7 inches the professor had allotted for the assignment suddenly seemed far too little. Putting ideas into polished prose proved harder than brainstorming, but the assignment was manageable now. Charms practice that followed was 100 times easier than essay writing for Harry. He had a natural aptitude. With just a little guidance from Veedy, his magical sensitivity and understanding stood out. He mastered basic spells quickly, much to everyone's surprise. Everyone, that is, except Veed. Under their admiring looks, Harry felt light and buoyant. He tried to keep his expression modest, but the anxiety and shame he'd felt upon comparing his notes to others had evaporated. His green eyes shone with a new, indescribable energy. "I'm actually good at this," he thought. Veed checked his watch. There was only half an hour until curfew. He clapped his hands and the practice stopped. "Everyone," he said, "a few days ago we had that run-in with Malfoy and his lot. They came off worse, but we had a scare too." His gaze lingered on Harry, Neville, and Hermione. "I noticed a problem. Knowing spells isn't the same as being able to protect yourself. If our reactions aren't practical and fast, we could still get hurt in a real attack." "You mean," Michael's face lit up, "we should train our practical skills?" "No way," Padma said, sounding alarmed. Hermione hesitated, then looked eager. What if someone gets hurt? We'll lose points. Don't always think about house points, Michael said. They're not everything. This is awesome. He could barely contain himself. Can we start now, Vede? Vede read their expressions, then shook his head. We can't just jump into dueling. I think everyone should at least know a few minor jinxes, but those are tricky to control and can injure friends. Healing them could mean a trip to Madame Pomfrey. So before practicing duels, we should master 2 basic spells, one defensive and one offensive. What spells? Harry asked quickly. Vede looked around. Expelliarmus and the shield charm. The shield charm? Hermione sounded surprised. We don't learn that until 5th year. Harry was surprised too, more at Hermione knowing the 5th year curriculum than at the spell itself. As for Vede, Harry trusted him implicitly. If Vede said he could teach something, Harry believed him. The shield charm is usually taught in 5th year because it's tricky, Vede admitted with a little pride. I learned it myself recently. It forms an invisible barrier around you that can deflect spells. It won't stop anything overwhelmingly powerful, though, so don't rely on it for everything. Harry instinctively touched the scar on his forehead. Neville's mouth set in a serious line. Expelliarmus, Vede continued, is the disarming charm. It makes an opponent's wand fly out of their hand. Since most wizards can't do much without their wands, disarming someone neutralizes them pretty effectively. Vede twirled his wand and then gripped it, looking each of them in the eye. So, shall we start with Expelliarmus? As a side note, according to the original books, Harry first used Expelliarmus during the dueling club in his 2nd year. Lockhart claimed it wasn't part of the normal progression. He learned the shield charm early in his 4th year to use at the Triwizard tasks, and later taught it to others in the DA. In the books, shield was generally a 5th year spell, but here, Vede had already learned it and wanted to pass it on. 80. When sending and receiving information, night fell, and Harry and Hermione returned to the Gryffindor common room together. Neville had knocked his head during spell practice and had gone to the infirmary to see Madame Pomfrey. Only 2 or 3 students lingered on the sofas, and the fire in the hearth danced, throwing mottled, flickering shadows over the walls like an ancient animated parchment. Good night, Harry, Hermione said. Get some rest, will you? Okay, good night. Harry watched her head toward the girls' dormitory, then climbed the spiral staircase to the boys' rooms, unable to stop himself from giving a little hop when no one was looking. During tonight's practice session, he had been the only one to disarm his opponent successfully. It was the first time he'd learned a spell faster than Hermione. The others had barely managed to cast smoothly. By the end, Hermione had only driven her opponent back 2 steps, and Michael had merely made his opponent flinch. Perhaps the wand light had been intimidating. Harry remembered the astonished, admiring looks from everyone, not because he was Harry Potter or the boy who lived, but because of the way he'd taken to the spell. Each member of the SSC had their own strengths. Harry had always thought he only had Quidditch to boast about, but now it seemed he was actually good at defense against the dark arts spells. Vede had even called him a genius in practical combat. All that pleasure evaporated the moment he pushed open the dormitory door. Ron lay against the headboard, flipping through a magazine. Hearing Harry, he didn't bother to look up. Seamus and Dean were probably already asleep, soft, even breaths coming from behind the curtains. The room felt different tonight. Harry remembered the promise he'd made to Ron. If Vede and the others welcomed Ron into the SSC, he would let Ron know through the friend account, and Ron would come immediately. Ron was still in his outdoor clothes, not his pajamas. Hi, Ron, Harry said, his voice flat. He almost wanted to run. Ron looked up slowly. Finished? How was your club practice? It was all right, Harry said stiffly. We learned Expelliarmus. He didn't know why he'd added that. Once the words were out, he couldn't take them back. He felt a stab of regret. So you asked for me? Ron said. You must have. It's okay if they said no. Tell me the truth. I can take it. Harry didn't know what to say. I didn't? Ron's eyebrows went up. SSC has rules. You can't just let anyone in. Everyone has to agree. I'm only a new member myself, so... Harry stammered through an explanation that sounded thin even to his own ears. Oh, Ron's voice went cold. He shut the curtain abruptly, lay down, and pulled the blanket over his head. Harry stood by the door, heart heavy. A small white orb of light floated over to the candelabra and settled there, bathing the dormitory in a steady glow. Vadi sat by the window, scrolling through messages on his friend account. The friend account couldn't retain text for long. If someone opened a message quickly, the words would disappear from the page, and if it wasn't opened at all, the text vanished within half an hour. That was why friends and family usually communicated right before bed. Zoe is very grateful for the candy Vidi Gray gave me. I shared it with my friends, and Mackie and Tess will try to make some. Vidi Gray will be able to eat them at the breakfast table, too. I've gathered some information on alchemies and sent it to you. Hope it helps. Oh, and Mr. Scamander replied to me. He said he welcomes my help. I'm so happy, Veed. I never thought this day would come. Thanks to your reminder, my friend. I'd like to discuss the friend account revision with you in person. Can we meet in Hogsmeade on Saturday? I know only third years have permission to go, but maybe Professor Mori can take you out? Actually, I also know a secret passage out of the castle. Veed, I received an answer from the person you mentioned. Veed's eyes lit up. He typed back quickly. Vadimus Lupin? Yes. As you requested, he says in his letter that he is proficient in most defense against the dark arts, including the Patronus charm. His transfiguration grade is outstanding. He's familiar with animagus training methods, and he can accept a weekly payment of 10 galleons. Signed, Remus Lupin. I've arranged to meet him tomorrow at the Leaky Cauldron. Vade breathed out and couldn't help smiling. He could ask Professor Flitwick about defense against the dark arts material, but not all the time. Flitwick had classes to teach, homework to grade, Ravenclaw to oversee, and patrols of the castle. When he had free time, he liked to go to the pub for a drink. Veed couldn't monopolize his time, same with Professor Mori. Over Christmas, Flitwick had given Veed a copy of the Book of Spells, but Veed soon discovered it was abridged. Most dark arts, curses, and hexes had been removed, and Flitwick had cut out spells he didn't want a first year exposed to yet. Apparition, the disillusionment charm, animagus procedures, portkeys, and so on. Flitwick's message had been clear. Vade was excellent at charms, but as a first year, he should stick to safe, harmless magic and leave advanced techniques for later. Veed didn't argue. Flitwick was upright and kind, but some of what Veed wanted to learn was beyond the professor's remit. Practicing those things alone, even with his golden finger advantage, was dangerous. Every chapter of the textbooks warned that failed spells could have grave consequences. Some could kill, some could turn people into non-human creatures, and some could cause irreversible damage that even magic couldn't fix. He needed a teacher, skilled, trustworthy, and willing to teach less conventional subjects. Remus Lupin seemed like an ideal choice.